Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to IO Radio with your host, Adam and Sal. And today we are doing an interview with a crypto developer we're going to call Louis, who's from Switzerland. And this is just a casual kind of thing. We've been trying for a while to get some crypto people to come on the show. One of the problems is, we find ourselves, each side of the crypto pro and con crypto argument kind of accuses the other side of being in a kind of a circle jerk where they're just surrounded by like-minded people, and we all kind of get jaded and maybe lose perspective of what the other side is doing or what their motivations are. So we've been trying to more and more have a little meeting of the minds where we get some people in here and we talk with them face to face. Sometimes on social media and over words, it's hard to convey intent, and it's easy to be more passive aggressive than you probably would be in real life. So this is part of an ongoing series where we're inviting people that disagree with us, or maybe they don't. We'll find out, to have an exchange and learn a little bit more about each side. So with that in mind, we have Louis from Switzerland, who is a crypto developer, and we don't really know that much more. So we're all going to just in real time discover each other and have a casual conversation. So welcome to the show, Louis.
Thank you very much, Adam.
And Sal, you have anything you want to say?
No, I was just going to say welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
So I guess you've been hanging out in the Discord, and I guess you're also participating in some of the social media communities. I guess you're on Reddit too and some other places.
Yes, that's correct.
And tell us what you do and where your position is with respect to the crypto industry.
Sure. So my position and the way I came to it is I'm studying to become a cybersecurity engineer here in Zurich. I have a focus on cryptography and distributed systems, and I've been interested in open source hacker communities and privacy preserving technologies. And it's mostly because of that I have that I'm in it from the technology, as some people say. That's from that perspective that I look at blockchain systems and Web3 more generally.
I gotcha. And you're fairly young, right? You're like 20
yes,
something?
I'm in my 20s, yes.
Are you employed full time by a company that's in the crypto industry?
Right now, yes, I'm in an internship at the smart contract auditing company.
Okay. And you're programming in Solidity and doing things like that?
Yes. I'm also reading Solidity than programming it. And I'm also open to other stacks and to zero knowledge projects and things like that.
I gotcha. So how long have you been into crypto? Is this something that you just discovered as a computer security person, that it was a field you could go into, or were you into it and it motivated you to get into cryptography and stuff?
I discovered it after I knew that I was in computer science and later in cybersecurity more specifically. And for a long time, I knew that it existed. I had a rough idea what it did and what I could do with it, but I didn't really see a need, and I didn't think that my plan was never to, and it's still not, to basically trade myself to $1 million. I don't think that's a plan. I think I'm better suited selling my expertise and building my education, which is what I've been doing. And so in relatively progressively, like in 2021 or so, I started using blockchain solutions more and learning about the ecosystem and technology more. And I saw that it could be a good, how do I say, field to go into. So I kept going essentially.
Okay, so you've been working in the blockchain industry. You said you're doing was it an apprenticeship, or you're consulting for a smart contract company?
An internship, yes.
An internship.
As part of my studies.
Gotcha. And so you've been looking at the technology for a while. Could you be specific about what you like about the technology, where you think its strengths lie, where its weaknesses might be?
Yes, I think its strength In a more general sense, the strength of crypto economic, as people say, technologies is they let you have less trust assumptions and less single points of failure when you build systems. And that's true of decentralized systems in general. And it's not necessarily useful for everything, but where was I going with this?
Well, I can stop you here. There's okay. Two things that you said right there I'm curious about. So one,
we would want to unpack this, the notion that something is decentralized has less points of failure and has less trust too.
Well, I think Louis said very clearly that it's the nature of decentralized systems in general is that there are fewer single points of failure. That is, I think, absolutely correct.
I disagree.
But I guess the point, but hold on. But the point I would make is that's not exclusive of, you don't need crypto for that. There are lots of distributed or decentralized systems. You know, if you think about a cluster, any kind of clustering technology, these are things that, yes, there are fewer single points of failure because it is a distributed system.
I disagree.
Okay, well, we can unpack that. But the second thing you said was that it enables less trust. That to me doesn't necessarily seem like a technology thing. That seems as though that's something else that we have to discuss. Do these systems actually require less trust? Are they in fact decentralized in terms of who controls them and how? Because the technical operation of a system is obviously different than who is in control of the source code.
Yes. So, I can address both points. You're absolutely right that you don't necessarily need to be a blockchain to be decentralized. The best example for me is BitTorrent, which is a decentralized system and has functioned so far. I think in my studies we also studied Usenet.
Stop. Okay, so BitTorrent is as an example of a decentralized peer-to-peer application for sure. But again, we need to preface this because it's not truly pure decentralized, right? BitTorrent only works if there's a central aggregator that keeps track of where all the torrents are. So if you don't know who to connect to through connecting with a central authority like the Pirate Bay or something like that, you can't. So behind every decentralized system, there is usually some kind of centralized authority that is the glue that holds it together. This is one of the things that I take exception to when people claim that decentralized systems are better or that they don't involve centralized authorities. Because when you take any particular application specifically, I think you can drill down and find, well, a purely, totally decentralized system can't function without some kind of directory, right? That allows everybody to be able to see what's available.
I disagree because you can use the Pirate Bay, but you can use any aggregator. You can use a private messaging group. You can put it on Ubuntu.com. You can find torrents for Ubuntu, the Ubuntu ISOs,
right?
And it doesn't need a Pirate Bay. So it's a component. It's really the application. But the application can be interchanged, and you can get into the decentralized system through anything that can share magnet links, essentially.
Right. But everything you cite is a centralized system where people come together. If the alternative to that being truly decentralized would be just email. Email would be an example where you can send from one person to another. But even email requires centralized systems like the domain name system and central servers. So the whole, behind every distributed decentralized system, you will find a cluster of centralized. Even the internet couldn't function without central authority being the host name system. If you understand what I'm talking about. The further you unpack it, the more you find there are, like, we would not be able to communicate with each other if there wasn't an authority, the top level domain servers that know and how the IP addresses are assigned.
Well, yeah,
there's
IP
an authority.
Addresses and AS numbers, right?
Right. So when you break it down, there's always some central authority, some catalog that everybody has to agree this is an authority, or else nobody can communicate with each other. Now, we might be nitpicking, but I do think it's an important point to bring up.
I think it's true. I think there's a nuance in the sense that you can have things that are more or less reliant on either a collection of authorities or a quarter of authorities or a consortium of authorities that That's something that it's a spectrum. It kind of depends on what you're looking for, and it's also a trust assumption, right? Do you trust 14 out of the 21 root DNS servers or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Louis, could you expand on that? Could you talk to us about why you say that blockchain either requires less trust or there's less of a requirement for trust? I can't remember how you phrased it exactly, but could you speak to that and maybe give us some examples of how that is actually implemented and how that's the case?
Yeah, so I use trust assumptions in a more technical meaning, and if you analyze the system from the point of view of security, you can say what you assume is true for the system to be secure, and you could have, for example, you could say a trusted third party. Let's do communication, confidential communication. You could give your message to a central third party. The central third party could give it to the recipient, and we trust that the third party will not disclose the email and breach confidentiality. And when you use certain cryptographic protocols, you can remove some or sometimes all reliance on trusted third parties, at least within the framework of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
That's absolutely true in the case of cryptography,
right? Which
but how does that apply to cryptocurrency and blockchain?
Yeah,
sorry.
Basically, the point we're getting at is what you're talking about is basic public-private key cryptography, which has nothing to do with crypto or blockchain,
or zero knowledge proofs or whatever, right?
I disagree. It's true in the field of cybersecurity. Can I find a non-cryptographic example?
Hold on. Just like, how does your example of not requiring as much trust apply to blockchain and cryptocurrency? So you're absolutely correct. For example, there's a Signal Foundation, which is actually a centralized authority who accepts messages but has implemented end-to-end encryption. So I don't need to worry about them spying on my messages. So I can send a message to Adam and I don't have to worry about them reading it.
Right.
But how does that, but they don't use blockchain for that. No blockchain is used, no cryptocurrency is used. How does your example of requiring less trust apply directly to cryptocurrency or blockchain?
Or more appropriately, what does blockchain add to that application that is a benefit?
Blockchain systems provide a total order broadcast channel with almost no trust assumptions, depending on how you want to look at it. But in the sense that
we'll unpack that in a minute. This no trust assumption too. I think. I mean, the argument is you're trusting code, right? You just assume the code is infallible, and therefore that's the source of not having to trust in anybody, right?
Well, every single computer system that I look at, is going to have an assumption that the code is correct. So that's true.
And that's trust. When you consider that's trust, you trust that it's correct. So it's not trustless. Instead of trusting whatever third parties you deem are not trustworthy, you're trusting anonymous coders, right? That their work
assuming they are anonymous.
Well,
what you can do is you can also ask someone else to review the code that you also trust.
Right.
And you can plug other trust assumptions, other providers instead of not having the choice.
So you're still trusting people. You're still trusting somebody else to audit it. You're still trusting that they do a good enough job.
But hold on, there's a certain, he's saying like, listen, you can open source it and you can have some kind of certainty that the code is going to do what it says that it does, but that doesn't affect the question of, well, who's running that code? Who's running that blockchain? Who's running those systems? Who minted all the tokens and controls all of that?
Well, we don't even need to go that far. This assumption that just because something is open source means it's stable and secure, that's something taken on faith and not necessarily on evidence.
There's always going to be doubt there.
One of the problems with having these discussions is that we gallop over key points. Like when somebody says, "Oh, it's decentralized," that's not an answer. That's not evidence. That's just a claim, and it's an implication that because decentralizing something makes it better. And I want to avoid just passing over that. Just like, oh, the transactions are trustless. I want to get down into it because I think that's where the conflict is between our different ideologies. You claim this transaction is trustless, and I'm saying there's still the same amount of
Did
trust
I say
involved.
that a transaction was trustless? I believe I was careful to speak more about trust minimization.
Trust
This was my
minimization.
intention.
So it's more or less trustworthy. So you think that your way provides less risk or something because the code that you're using.
Okay, we're talking about over each other. It requires trusting less parties or a different set of parties that either strictly less. If it's a different set, we can't really say that it's more or less trust minimized. But I think we can find an example where we clearly reduce it. Oops. No.
Okay.
And do we? Sorry, I maybe I missed this, but did we get a specific example of how
blockchain reduces trust dependence,
or crypto, like an actual example of how that works? That's not just a property of the underlying cryptography that's used.
I don't think we did. So,
it's like maybe there's a project. Like I saw that you're interested in Chia. There's something called Chia. I saw that you seem to be interested in a few different blockchain projects. Maybe there's a specific example in there, a specific use case that makes things so that instead of having to trust a central intermediary, something is trustless.
Yeah. So I can run this example. I will run the Climate Action Data Trust organization, which is part of the World Bank. Which
could you explain that? Yeah.
Yes, it's a intergovernment organization that is working on voluntary carbon credit markets, and they found that if they wanted to keep their carbon registry in the accounting sense, right, it made the most sense to put it on some kind of reliable blockchain, which also happens to be the one you mentioned, but I'm not really sure. It can be whatever blockchain. Mm-hmm. And so my claim is that this is a use case.
And is that a public permissionless blockchain or is that a private blockchain?
It is public permissionless. Anyone can access the data. I didn't run the code for that, but it's
data. Can anyone write? Because reading the data, okay, forget it. But can anyone write to that database?
Depends. Can anyone write to that database? Well, you can't write anything. But if you have...
Presumably there's data on that blockchain. Who puts the data there?
Anyone who...
is authorized, right? Is authorized.
I'm not sure about that.
So I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that ultimately, why do you even need a blockchain for this? It's a centralized database system that has the correct administrative control. Would be fine. Yeah. Why does it have to be a blockchain? And don't we need the answer? And to really answer that question, don't we really need to know who is able to write to that blockchain and under what circumstances?
Possibly. But let's say that it's only permission parties who are, let's say, carbon registry administrator, and that no one else can create entries, at least in this part of the blockchain. Why would you still use a public blockchain? My answer is that the registry itself is its integrity is very important because it's the future of the planet, right? It's the accounting for the carbon emissions. And if you had one or a few parties who could administrate the servers, you couldn't trust that they wouldn't double count credits or do fraud in such a way that they would benefit at the expense of the entirety of humanity. So it seems that the registry itself is too important to just put it on a Kubernetes cluster or something like that.
Isn't it though that the issue we're running into here is the Oracle problem? It's how does that data get onto the blockchain in the first place? And if that process isn't guarded, then or isn't strictly controlled, then it doesn't really matter where you put the data. It doesn't matter that after it goes onto the blockchain, it can't be altered.
Or who puts the data on. You know?
Yeah. Like those are the important questions. How does that data even get generated? And who's responsible for putting it on there? That's the issue. It's not once the data is in some registry, this is what it says, and we can't change it. I mean, if you have a public registry, I mean, that can be monitored fairly easily. You can expose data publicly, and there can be a record of it. Again, this is like the argument that, for property registries, we should use blockchain because it's immutable. But there's sort of this, we ignore that it would be the government or whatever institution you put power into that would be controlling the data that gets put into that registry.
Right. It's the Oracle problem. Just because blockchain is immutable doesn't mean whoever puts the data on chain is doing it correctly. If they put bad data or they mess with these carbon credits in a way that benefits some special interests, it gives the public a false sense of security, thinking, well, if it's on chain, it must be legit. So that's the problem with blockchain. And obviously, you have that problem with any database. Blockchain doesn't solve it. And if you want to verify the integrity of data, you just use standard cryptography, which can be applied to any kind of database. So it doesn't really make sense to use a blockchain, which is a database that cannot be altered to correct bad data. So it just seems like it's just by design a poor choice for that kind of application.
Okay. In the specific case of the registry, I agree that you also have to, regardless if it's a blockchain or not, you have to scrutinize the quality of the credits you emit.
Right.
But and yet the property registry, if it's not immutable, it's kind of pointless to put it on a blockchain. But what you also get is a degree of auditability. You can see, even you see that bad data was put on a blockchain and that you should probably compensate for it. You see where all the credits are. You can count the amount of credits emitted and retired. So, it functions as a registry. And we could definitely discuss whether we can achieve this with more standard cryptography or things like that. And who knows, maybe we find a much better solution and we can go to the CADT and make a ton of money by saying, okay, forget this blockchain stuff.
Wait, I want to directly address that if you're going to go off on another thing, but if you're going to address that too, go ahead. Sam.
No, you go first.
So, again, everything that you're describing could be done with what's called a journaling file system. I assume you're familiar with the technology, or just general log files that are cryptographically signed. There's nothing that blockchain adds to the application. If you want to be able to keep track of every single transaction, I mean, WordPress, Wikipedia keeps track of every edit and the timestamps and all of that. They don't need to use a blockchain for that. They've got a more efficient database that stores it more compactly, faster than blockchain, and so I see everything that you're saying it delivers can be done with other technology. I have yet to see an argument for what blockchain actually does that makes it better or faster. Other than blockchain, when you say blockchain, some people think, "Oh, that sounds cool."
Sure. Specifically, Wikipedia and WordPress have a huge trust assumption. They have system administrators, and it's totally fine for what they do. But I don't think we want to have a system administrator for the global carbon registry. I don't think even governments would want.
But hold on, when there's a dispute about those carbon credits, how does that get resolved?
What do we mean a dispute?
So you have some credit that's associated with one party, and they say, actually, that shouldn't be us. That shouldn't be them. That should be us. We had a legal dispute. We split into different companies, and actually that carbon credit should be applied to our company and not this other company. And the other company says, well, no, that carbon credit is ours. That should apply to us because, X, Y, and Z. How would that dispute get resolved? Because obviously there's going to potentially be mistakes. If someone's entering the data, you could just have somebody make a mistake. You could have somebody fat finger an extra zero somewhere,
or
something's inaccurate. So how does that dispute get resolved? And don't they just then go and append the registry? They're just going to go and add something else. So ultimately, the integrity of the data doesn't have anything to do with the blockchain. It has to do with everything else. It has to do with all the other human systems that are in place that guarantee the integrity of that data, that resolve the disputes, and that make sure that there's no funny business going on. but just depending on a registry doesn't mean anything.
So I would say that, well, integrity and correctness, veracity are not exactly the same thing. I agree that veracity is also requires a human element. So in the first case you mentioned, there's two entities that have a property dispute over a carbon credit token. The non-solution in the chain is that someone has the credit. The legal solution is you might need to say, okay, please transfer the credit or things like that. And it's just you have to resolve it that way, at least in this paradigm.
Yeah, you have to resolve it off chain.
Fat fingering, yes, you do. And when it comes to fat fingering, sorry, you can burn 90% of what you emitted if it's an honest mistake. There you go.
Okay, so just the concept of carbon credits, the fact that they represent something and it's stored on blockchain, what meaning would that have without central authorities who pass legislation that determine who gets what carbon credits and determine how these carbon credits have any real world utility, right? So it just seems like you're decentralizing 1% of this system. And the real value of carbon credits has absolutely nothing to do with blockchain. It has to do with these central authorities, these governments that have passed laws that have treaties, right? That are determining what carbon credits mean and how they apply and how they can affect taxation and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, what's on the database is tertiary to what these central authorities how they decide to interpret what the credits mean in the first place, right?
The catch is that there's not one central authority, there's 190 of them in this case.
Right.
And the mere fact that you have this many parties that don't necessarily want to trust each other means that you have some channel that at least keeps integrity of the data. So,
okay. So these 100-something separate entities, the only reason why they're all working together is probably because they agreed to some kind of overarching treaty, right, or some standard. So they had to submit to some central authority before they could even agree to work together, right?
No, well, government. I wouldn't say
carbon
that
credit in France has to have equal meaning as a carbon credit in Switzerland as in the United States, right? They all have to concede to some kind of standard that they all agreed to, and presumably, there's some kind of board that's in charge of maintaining these standards, right?
Standards does not necessarily imply central authority. You have to set the rules and you have to agree how you set the rules, but then you also have enforcement of the rules. And it makes sense that some part of the enforcement of the rule, not 100% of it, but the part about counting, locating where tokens are going, who is doing what, can be automated. You can never automate and decentralize every process, decentralized quote unquote, but you can do something.
So you're saying, Louis, that the blockchain system in this case is enforcing the rules around trading and transferring and registering carbon credits.
Some of the rules, yes.
I don't see how it can enforce anything. It's just identifying information.
Well, I guess my question would be why is that? And I think what Louis is saying, and you can tell me if I'm correct, Louis, is that the reason why blockchain is better in this case is because there's no one entity who's running that database.
Yes.
So that's what he's saying, Adam.
Right, now, but I would disagree that there may actually be one entity running the database. We just don't know.
Exactly. So without knowing the data, like Louis, you weren't able to tell us how this stuff gets put on there in the first place, or who has authorization to do that, or how that works. Like those are all the critical questions. And I think if you drill down, I'm not sure that we'd find there's an actual need for this blockchain versus another kind of system that can display this public information so that it can be audited by the public. I mean, that's really what the goal is, right? The goal is to make this information public so it's auditable and it's verifiable. I'm not sure that you require a blockchain for that. I'm not sure that a blockchain database adds anything to that process, aside from, it seems like, having this arbitrary, because it sounds to me like what you can actually do is you can transfer the credits back and forth. So
yeah, you have
in
to
a tokenized manner, right?
Maybe not even once, yes. And you also have to explicitly retire a certain amount of credits and be able to prove, okay, I am United Airlines. I had this flight and I retired this many credits to offset this flight, for example.
Right. And if there's a dispute, though, it still has to go to the legal process. It still has to appeal to a centralized. So that ultimately, it is subject to a central authority.
What kind of dispute? What central authority? There's no world credit court anywhere.
Well, so hold on. So it would be, like Adam said, there would have had to have been a group of countries or someone who would have had to sign some treaty to make this happen. This doesn't, or is this happening voluntarily, independently? Companies are just signing up to do this, or is this part of something that's been legislated?
They are voluntary carbon markets. They are encouraged by the World Bank, but there's not necessarily as much legislation, as that.
Okay, well, let's. I think maybe how do you resolve conflicts is one area, but I don't think we don't even have to worry about that particular scenario. Just the larger sense of why would anybody participate in the carbon credit system in the first place? I guarantee you, these corporations are not doing it out of the kindness of their hearts and their concern for the environment. There's probably some very specific tax advantages. So if you have X amount of carbon credits, it can offset paying certain amount of taxes. There's obviously some incentive program that governments have all agreed to apply in order to get corporations and other entities to participate in keeping track of their energy usage, right? I don't know the exact details of it, but I assume there has to be some incentive for them to even participate. And so somebody is moderating whatever those deals are. And it's not completely decentralized. It's governments, or it's an overarching group of people that is, like the United Nations, right? Well, hold on. Maybe wait. Just let me say, the United Nations is an entity that's created as a result of a bunch of participating nation states that have given the United Nations the authority to be able to have certain powers and influence. I assume that the whole carbon credit thing wouldn't work at all if there wasn't some similar agency that everybody that participates has given this agency the authority to moderate the system, right?
Well, not necessarily. There's coordination, there's agreement between the parties, but that doesn't, well, you specifically mentioned, that there's a tax advantage, there's an incentive. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need some kind of system to keep track of the rules and prevent some kinds of cheating, not necessarily.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you there either. No. Yeah, you're right.
Louis, could you, because we're obviously, you know more about how this system actually works than we do. Could you describe for us how, if I'm American Airlines, like how am I leveraging the system? How am I opting in? How am I getting credits? Like, how does this all work?
Yeah. So what you would do, I assume, is you say we put everywhere on our marketing and our tickets that we offset our flights. So we count the amount of carbon that our flights have produced. We make a document to explain how we computed that number. We hope that nobody finds a mistake in it, or we
let's
hope
assume
that we don't
correct.
get caught, right?
Yeah,
so you
assume that's correct, yeah.
Okay, so you have this number, and you say we're going to go on the CADT blockchain, and we're going to acquire some credits. We're going to retire them, and we can show the transaction of the credits that we retired.
Okay, so can I need to ask for a clarification. I understand what you said, but who is putting the credits? So what American Airlines is doing, they're using carbon, and presumably there are these credits which act as an offset, but how does that offset actually work? Who's putting those offsets on the blockchain?
I think we're way in the weeds here.
but that's an important question because, like, is it just some guy saying, "Oh yeah,
Of course,
American
it's some
Airlines,
guy.
yeah, you
It's
totally,
some guy. Of course, it's some guy. What do you think?
totally offset that carbon. Great job, guys."
It's always some guy. Everything that gets put on the blockchain is put on by some guy.
But maybe
There's
Louis
not going to be a
knows that
different
that's not
answer.
the case. Maybe
What do you think? It's a
Louis knows
robot?
the guy. Who knows? No, but who is it? Like, how does that
He
work?
doesn't
That's an
know.
important question.
You know that's
Right.
deep in the weeds.
That's not in the weeds. That's a
Okay.
basic element of how the system functions.
All right,
There's two
Louis.
parties
Well,
here, right?
Louis,
There's someone-
Louis
hold on,
Sal seems to think you know who works for United Airlines that
There's
puts
someone.
stuff on the.
No. That's not. It has nothing to do with United Airlines. It's who somebody's buying something and somebody's selling something, right? That's essentially what's happening. That's a transaction. So we have identified who's buying. Okay, American Airlines wants to buy carbon credits. Well, who's selling it to them?
Okay, thank you, Sal.
That's all I want to know. Yeah.
Oh well, are carbon credits actually even being bought and sold? And is that something that you facilitate? It might not even be within your area of, work.
Whose area of work?
Yours. I mean, is this blockchain handling transactions between parties, or is it just a reference of who's accumulating the credits?
Okay, so I'm not super deep into it, but my understanding, which I can say, is that yes, it is something where anyone can exchange credits in exchange for
Not anyone.
money.
We can't do it,
and in
right?
terms of,
It's only certain people that are
I
authorized.
I would expect that you can. If you
So, like,
find
I
a
have
counterparty.
I have like a garden, like I have like 20 trees in my backyard, and I find somebody that says that, yeah, this guy has 20 trees, so he can sell a credit to American Airlines for some money.
Okay, so let's go to the creation of credits then. What you need to do is have a trusted carbon registry, and who decides what carbon registries are trustworthy? That's also a question. That says, okay, we're going to go document this. We're going to say, okay, there are some trees. Here's some information about trees. And here's a single transaction where we emitted the correct number of credits. And now you publish this, and you publish also as metadata on chain, I think, and you've created those credits. And eventually, maybe United Airlines will buy those credits.
Okay,
Can't
but
I just create another? Can I just go to another create another blockchain, and then have my credits on Chia and have my credits on a completely different blockchain and sell them twice? So American Airlines and United can both buy my carbon credit for the same underlying.
no, you
asset
can't
or carbon
because
sink?
I can answer that. You can't because some authority has decided that this particular blockchain is the one they're going to use.
What if I register with a different authority?
Well,
I
Because
disagree
it's not mandated by the
sure,
government.
you can
It's a
have
completely
multiple carbon
independent
credit
thing.
markets you want, but then again,
Yeah.
you got to find somebody that pays attention to them.
Yeah. So again, it doesn't seem like blockchain is solving anything here. It seems like
And-
the root of the issue that we need to solve is, again, a human problem, and having all this data in a centralized database is more than adequate, because ultimately whether this whole thing is useful or not depends on the legislation and the enforcement of making sure people aren't double selling carbon credits.
I disagree that canonicality, the ability to say that this is the canonical way most people agree to emit carbon credits, implies a central authority. We can agree that certain things are canonical, like language, for example, without meaning that there's an authority. So I disagree with something you said.
But you can say theoretically you believe there isn't an authority, but you haven't proven there isn't one. And every example that we bring up, there's always some authority. There's always some centralization. The deeper you go, like you can't use the internet, period, without authority. You can't engage in any wireless communications without a central authority. In the case of the United States, we have an organization called the Federal Communications Commission. Every radio frequency that is in use by any wireless device has to be licensed by a central authority. The FCC determines who can broadcast on which bands and what power level they can use. And it's policed very aggressively, because without this central authority, it would be chaos. People could step on top of each other's broadcasts. And presumably, there's a similar structure all around the world. I'm sure Switzerland has an authority, a central authority that determines these devices can use these frequencies. Because without that authority, there could be no reliable communication. And I think when you look into every one of these decentralized things, in order for them to interoperate in the first place, they have to submit to a central authority. Can you at least agree with that?
Again, I disagree that coordination necessarily implies that there's an authority and that there's a powerful authority. In the case of radio frequencies, I'm not very well versed into that, but I know that even without breaking the law, there are a lot of frequencies, for example, the Wi-Fi frequencies, where any device that you want, that you can build yourself as long as it's compliant, you can broadcast
as long as it's compliant.
pretty much whatever you want, and you don't need the permission of anyone.
Right, but you just said as long as
there's a large degree of freedom, even though you can't send literally anything on literally any frequency.
So again, you the little word, as long as it's compliant. Compliant means if you build a device, you're limited to these frequencies and you're limited to this power. If you bump the power over that, you cross this boundary and the authorities will come after you and shut you down. They're out there. They're patrolling the airwaves. If I build a CB radio and I give it too much power and I'm broadcasting over stuff as I'm driving down the highway, the FCC, if I do it enough, they will eventually track me down with radio locators and sanction me. And presumably, this happens all around the world. Otherwise, you wouldn't have reliable communications. You don't have to understand who specifically is in charge, but you have to at least recognize there has to be some policing of this because, human nature, if you don't have rules, it can be chaotic. I mean, especially in Switzerland, there's a country with a lot of rules, right?
I don't know. I mean, maybe it's a bit more densely populated, so you have less space to shoot guns in the air. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, I don't know also about the radio frequencies. So.
Right.
Okay. So maybe we should move on. I think I think the audience will sort of know what our positions are. Maybe we could ask Louis about what he thinks about actual use cases. So you provided the example of the carbon credit market. Are there other use cases that we went into the weeds on that, but are there other crypto or blockchain projects where you think are a good example of a use case, something that's providing real world utility here and now?
Yes, I would say the specific case of transactions of money, either without too many trust assumptions, and at any point in the day between any point on the planet.
Okay. So you said wait. No, let me say. You said money, transactions of money.
Yes, right? I said money.
Okay. Crypto is not money. Money is traditionally that which can be used to pay for most goods and services, and crypto is still basically a token that represents value to select people who are willing to pay for it. So I think there's a disconnect there, and I hear this a lot. Crypto allows you to send money around the world instantly, but in order to really use that, you still have to convert it into fiat. Yeah, are you following that?
Yes. Do you accept that commodity money is a phenomenon that exists?
Well, anything technically could have value to certain people.
I wouldn't call money a commodity. I think that's a complete.
That is not my argument.
Incorrect.
He said commodity money.
So I guess what do you mean by commodity money? As in people making payments with commodities? So like yes. You send me 10 bushels of hay, I send you a ton of copper?
Also known as bartering.
Yeah, it's barter.
It's
you can call it commodity money if you want, but at that point, it's barter.
Well, he's talking more like a currency. Money the term money is somewhat ambiguous, but the general term is the most popular form of payment for goods and services. Crypto is not the most popular form of payment for goods and services. Neither is chickens or gold. Can you use them as a transfer of value between parties? Yes. Can you argue that's, quote, money in a very narrow context, but not in a larger context?
Yeah. Does a submarine swim? Like, sure, if that's how you want to define swimming.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're just going to argue definitions, the most popular way to exchange thing, I mean, that can be a definition. I guess if in some place or some where crypto becomes more popular than everything else, then it will become money.
Yes.
But I don't know if it's useful to model reality to use this definition that has this popularity element to it. Even though it's also useful to know if you're going to be able to use your money or not, right?
Right, but understand, if we can't agree on what money means, we're going to have trouble getting our points across. We have to find some common ground. We have to agree money is this and currency is this and commodities are that. And this is one of the problems we find when we argue about crypto is that there's a lot of assumptions that are made that not everybody would agree to, that like decentralizing something is better or that blockchain is, a better database.
Well, it seems that people call cryptocurrencies or speculative digital tokens money because they sort of want to get some of the legitimacy that term implies. It seems as though whether that token actually functions as money is sort of irrelevant. But Louis, would you say that for you, the best example of crypto being used as money would that be Bitcoin for you? What would be the best example?
For me, I think Bitcoin is a good tech demo, but consuming this much energy to send one type of unit of money at 7 transactions per second is not very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
so you think Ethereum maybe would be a better example?
Yeah. What's the best example for you of money?
For me, currently, the best example, the one I've used 3 times, would be Ethereum. Yes.
Ethereum.
And so Ethereum obviously can scale slightly better than Bitcoin, but it still has a whole bunch of other problems, right? I mean, the whole concept of a transaction market where you can bid and have your transactions front run others based on how much fees you pay. How does that make transactions better for regular people?
It makes them worse, absolutely. And in a way, that's the price you pay for less trust assumptions. And what was I about to say? And
so let's stop right there. That's the
Absolutely.
price you pay for less trust assumptions. So I would call this a begging the question fallacy there. You're implying that there's less trust that you have to have in systems in order to use this. And I would say it's probably exactly the opposite. If we drill it down specifically, you'll find
I object to you calling this a fallacy. We can go into trust assumptions, but this is just a statement I made.
Yeah. But it's a statement that you made for which there's not. You haven't proven that there's less trust assumptions using Ethereum than traditional transactional systems.
Right, because the conversation didn't go there.
Okay. Well, explain to us how there's less trust. Well, what is a trust assumption anyway, according to your definition?
A trust assumption is an assumption that a party or a set of party will respect the protocol that written as part of a computer system. You assume that your computer is going to do what you expect.
Okay.
And that's a trust assumption into it.
Okay. And so when I go to my ATM, I have trust assumptions that the technology there is going to operate the way I expect it to. So those are trust assumptions. Do I have less trust assumptions with an ATM versus a human being, a teller at a window?
Good question. I would say that you have comparable trust assumptions because the teller could be unavailable, the ATM machine could be unavailable. There may be scenarios where they take your money or they refuse to service you, which is unavailability, but I don't think that we can order them.
Well, hold on, but couldn't the teller take, you ask the teller for $100, Adam, and I give you $100, but actually on the back end, I take $120 out of your account and I keep the extra 20 for myself.
Well, that could be done with an ATM too, via code.
Yes, so they're all ATM could do that as well.
Okay, hacked ATM. Yeah, that's true.
So explain to us how, given that there's comparable trust assumptions with, say, an ATM versus a teller, how is there less trust assumptions using Ethereum?
There is the assumptions you have is that the majority of the block producers are not coordinated among themselves to try to prevent or harm your transactions. That's the first assumption for Ethereum. And there's a whole game with the Ethereum where if people try to coordinate a certain way, we add or remove Ethereum to their balance, and at the end of the day, you produce what I said earlier, a totally ordered broadcast channel.
Okay, so in Ethereum, when you execute a transaction, you're still going to go through some kind of front end before that gets to the blockchain. You know, some kind of wallet software, some kind of exchange, some kind of system. Then it goes onto the blockchain, and then that's where it touches this trustless thing. Well, what if, do you think that if an ATM used a blockchain or a teller, when they punched in stuff into the computer, it went to a blockchain instead of their internal database, that this would reduce the trust assumptions?
Depending on how you said it, I would say yes, because if you sign a transaction of $100 towards the ATM at the moment that you want to withdraw the money, we cannot have the scenario where the ATM withdraws 120, just by definition.
Right, but we still have the Oracle problem in all three scenarios. You know, you're depending upon the ATM not making a mistake, you're depending upon the teller not making a mistake, and if you're dealing in Ethereum, you're depending upon all these front-end things, the wallet software, that there's no other software that's sitting in the computer looking at your, say, cutting and paste cache, or that's capturing keystrokes. You know, at least with an ATM, I'm working with some proprietary hardware and software that has been exclusively designed just for that one particular application and fine-tuned for it. Whereas if I'm running wallet software, it's probably running on a phone with 87 other applications, any of which could potentially be eavesdropping on the application. I fail to see where there's less trust assumptions using crypto in any of these scenarios.
Yeah, well, you said the Oracle problem. This is more so a software supply chain and hardware supply chain attack problem. But what was I about to say? Go ahead, Sam.
Oh, no, I was just going to ask some, I think, very basic questions. So for Ethereum, the people who created and control the Ethereum Foundation, would you say that they have a large amount of Ethereum?
Yes.
So they reserved a number of the tokens for themselves.
Yeah, that is true.
And I assume
that's the tricky point with Ethereum, the whole token distribution.
Let's just put this all out in the open. So do you think that they have a vested interest in making sure Ethereum rises to a value as high as possible, that they want to pump the value of Ethereum as much as is possible?
It depends. It could be their strategy. It could also be that they have enough money. But if we're thinking in terms of, if we're assuming the worst, we should assume that they are trying to pump it. You're right.
Do you think that they want the value to be $1, or do you think they want the value to be 4,000 fiat dollars? I would say I suspect they prefer it to be 4,000 as opposed to 1.
I think nobody's going to disagree with you.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're saying that this is a trustless, decentralized system, but the people who control and write the source code for the foundation have a vested interest in keeping their token as inflated in value as possible. So in terms of whose interests are going to be represented, if your interests potentially make Ethereum more useful as money or as a currency, but it will negatively affect the value of that token, those changes will never be adopted in that system, because the people who control the system have a vested interest in ensuring that it's as inflated as possible. And this is true of Bitcoin. This is true of other cryptocurrencies. And the issue is there's no fundamental mechanism. So if you have an issue with your economy in Switzerland, let's say with your economy in Switzerland, there are democratic mechanisms to remedy that. the Ethereum Foundation ultimately seems as though it is an autocratic and totalitarian organization where the interests of the early adopters and the majority token holders are represented, and any other interest will never be represented, can never be represented. So this seems like a fundamentally undemocratic system to me.
Sure. I would say I don't think that in terms of software development, the Ethereum Foundation has this type of influence, but generally it's true that interest of token holders is, and especially with proof of stake, is an issue. You would have to explore that in more depth, but one of the ways to try to avoid that is to try to distribute the token enough that there are not people who control large swaths of it, especially not.
So you need to redistribute. You need to redistribute the wealth in the system, is what you're saying.
When you bootstrap the system, you need to be careful about that. Yes.
See, there's a fundamental conflict of interest in that concept, right? Obviously, if the wider the token distribution is, the more fair and the more general consensus mechanisms are equitable. But of course, anybody who launches a crypto project, their main reason seems to be to hold a large group of tokens for themselves and cash out later and ride a Lambo into the sunset. And there's a conflict of interest there. You're talking about the value of decentralization, but the blockchain that you've hitched your wagon to is run by a foundation that is basically controlled by one guy. Sure, it's open source. Sure, people can fork the code if they want to, but Vitalik controls a tremendous amount of influence.
I wouldn't say it's one guy, but I would definitely say it's a cartel of individuals.
It's one guy. I mean, everybody knows who Vitalik is. When he opens his mouth, stuff, and he controls the foundation. He controls the foundation too.
But he can't sell his tokens for fiat without the exchanges. Like, there are other parties here who are involved.
Of course.
So there's a cartel. Yeah.
But the point is that in the case of Ethereum, we've seen examples in its history where, in the DAO hack, where, the cartel, whether you want to say it's Vitalik and his minions or it's groups of separate minions, it was a small group of people that unilaterally made a decision. There was no vote put up, hey, let's roll back the blockchain to address this hack. So the notion that it's decentralized and not under anybody else's control is not reflected by the actual history of the chain. These are the kind of conflicts that we kind of can't ignore.
It just seems like, and I'm sorry, Louis, if you want to interject here, feel free, but it just seems as though there's a big criticism of capitalism. They're saying, hey, there's too many people with too little, and cryptocurrency is going to solve that. But what we see is the exact same behavior, the exact same systems. And in fact, in terms of, the Gini coefficient, which measures inequality, it's actually worse than the existing economic system. So I don't see how this stuff being used as money is going to lead to any kind of desirable or more equitable society. It seems as though it's actually going to put you in a worse position because there are no fundamental democratic mechanisms to redistribute wealth, for example, within Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And the idea that you're going to do that at the beginning and nothing's going to go wrong and everything's going to be perfect seems unlikely. And it seems like the only way to actually create a money system that works for everyone is to have that be democratically governed, not be controlled by a few private special interests. At least to me, but what do I know? I'm just some guy on the internet talking.
I think maybe one of the issues is, and we ran into this because we had a discussion with another crypto developer who was in his early 20s, and we're probably going off too much on the philosophical and ethical conflicts of interest.
That's my fault.
Yeah. When we're talking, one of the things I've realized is when we talk with these young developers, they're and I'm not faulting you because you're as young as you are. I wish we all could go back to being in our 20s. I would love that. Love to redo some things. But you're not thinking about your ethical footprint on the planet and whether or not what you're doing is in the, in this case, you're up and coming, you're looking for opportunities, and there's money in this market.
We can't say that. I mean, I think Louis said that he was very concerned about the planet and carbon emissions. So it seems as though Louis is thinking about his
Right.
ethical
I'm not
footprint.
talking specifically in his case, but I'm just saying in general sense,
Okay.
these young
Okay,
developers are, this is their opportunity. This is where the money is. This is where the market is.
Yeah. They,
Now, correct us if
people
we're
willing to
wrong.
take
If I may,
Are you
this is-
in it to save the world? Or are you in it because it's a very lucrative industry and you want to take advantage of that?
I am in it both because I believe that open source and privacy preserving technologies are important. I believe that this is something I have competence in, and it's also nice that I can be paid for the education I have and the expertise I have. Yes. If I may, I mean, it's a bit interesting, this conversation, because multiple times, and I'm not, this is not necessarily a bad thing, but you've tried to use me as a springboard to talk about in this instance, developers in their 20s more generally, which, I mean, I can live with that, but it's interesting.
Well, let me qualify that, because we had another discussion that we never aired.
That's right.
We interviewed a guy who was from Croatia, Sal?
Croatia, yeah.
So he was similar to you. He was a developer, and he hitched his wagon into crypto. And after our long discussion, what we basically were left with was this guy's best opportunity to make money. He wasn't really interested in arguing and defending whether or not crypto was good for the world or not. But where he lived, there was rampant corruption. There was little opportunity. The local jobs that he could get paid a fraction of what he could get doing this crypto thing. So it was almost like, it just felt inappropriate to kind of talk about ethical considerations when he was just trying to survive. Now, maybe it's a completely different situation with you, but this is something that we've come across when we've talked with a lot of these young developers. And so sometimes I wonder, maybe we don't want to argue those points.
We should ask Louis, though. We should ask, do you have ethical reservations about cryptocurrency and blockchain? And if so, where do those lie? Like, how do you view it within your own personal ethical framework?
Mm-hmm.
The reason I am in skeptical and intellectualist but skeptical communities like yourself is because I want to question my priors. Mm-hmm. So I do have ethical reservation. I've concluded that for now, at least, I think I'm on the right path. But I also have a plan B. I can go into a different domain if I decide that this is not a good idea.
Right. Well, let me ask you this: what would you think we get wrong about you and about the field? And what's your criticism of crypto critics?
That's a meta question. I think I think it's this question of usefulness and potential. I think that a totally other broadcast channel, and one that is trust minimized. I see value in trust minimization and also privacy preservation and transparency that is enforced by cryptography, and you don't necessarily see it, or you don't see it the same way. So that's the disconnect.
No, I would agree with all of those things. I think what you just said, I agree. I think the disagreement is that, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to speak for you, mm-hmm. but the disagreement would be that we don't feel that cryptocurrency, speculative digital tokens, or blockchains is necessarily required for any of the things that you just described.
I think we all agree that removing corruption and corruptible parties from transactions is definitely something we want to strive to. We want to eliminate that. We want to make all transactions more equitable and fair. I think we also want to preserve everybody's privacy. We want some degree of transparency so we can check things. We all see eye to eye on those points, but the notion that crypto and blockchain is the best avenue to pursue those, I have very strong feelings that that's not, that I can back up with lots of evidence. When I talk to people about, how is decentralizing something making it better, I often get abstract things. I don't get very specific examples. And when they cite specific examples, we can break it down and prove it doesn't work.
I think that also just generally that, like, I know I talk about this a lot, but the concept of decentralized, you really need to separate these two concepts out, which is there's the way a system works and functions, and there's a way a system, how it's controlled. So just because my system is decentralized in that it is distributed, for example, if it's a university computer system that's distributed, well, that's great. It's a decentralized system. There are fewer single points of failure, but there is still a single point of control, which would be, the dean or whoever, right, who can say, shut the system down. So the idea that just because a system is decentralized in terms of how it works has no bearing on if it's decentralized in terms of how it's controlled.
Or whether it's better or not, really.
Right, and we have this in all systems. This duality is present in all systems, right? We have a political system, which controls things, and we have an economic system, which is how things get made and how wealth gets generated and how we're productive. There's a way things work, and there's a way things are controlled. And that's always the case in any system that you look at. So we have to be really careful when we say making things decentralized makes it better. Well, maybe it does if it's done in such a way, like democracy is an example of a decentralized control mechanism for our societies, right? We have representative democracy. We distribute power in Canada, for instance, among a certain number of parliamentarians.
Right, but those
decisions on our behalf.
That collection
so that's decentralized.
But that collection of parliamentarians becomes a centralized authority.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
So what you find in every one of these systems is that behind every system that is actually functioning and providing a useful service, you'll find a combination of centralized and decentralized systems. So the notion that the more you can decentralize something, the better it could be, doesn't seem to be backed up in reality when you start to unpack things. So, at least
Louis, we've been ranting. Do you want to comment on anything we've said?
I think it ran off my attention span. So, what you were saying, well, when I say decentralized, I mean the control is decentralized because a distributed system is a system that doesn't have a technical point of failure, but point of control. But I think that's true to a large extent.
So control is decentralized in Ethereum, is what you're saying?
To a large degree, it is.
I think we would disagree there.
Yeah, I mean,
that's fine. We can disagree.
Well, let me give you a specific example. Okay, Ethereum. There's just a small number of people that control the code base, and we don't even really know who all has commit access to the Ethereum repository. It is public; people can take the code and fork it. Now, how does Ethereum, the code base, evolve? It evolves through the result of something called EIPs, right? Which are proposals that people make that contain code changes or policy changes to the Ethereum core that they submit. Who do they submit those to? A small cadre of people that are handpicked, that are not accountable. They're not in the positions through consensus. They are there because of Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation and whoever is in charge of that. So there is some appearance of consensus, right, in that anybody can submit an EIP, but whether that EIP gets considered and to what degree it gets considered is ultimately approved by a small centralized set of gatekeepers. Do you disagree with that?
Yes, I disagree with that. I think in open source governance, even to a time before Bitcoin even existed, it's true that there are stewards and people who have this role of coordinating and putting things in order, but fundamentally they don't have the power to make arbitrary decisions. There are also other stakeholders that will look at it and decide if they like the version or not. And there's the possibility that you could have a fork. You would say, right, that the Linux kernel is not controlled by Linux servers, right? Linux servers does not own my computer that I'm using right now.
Well, Linus controls the Linux kernel.
No, I would agree with you, Louis, but there would be some caveats. So you are correct, but Linus has a great deal of influence over the direction and the development,
just like Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation does.
And the Linux Foundation, you would have to look legally at what, I'm not sure how it's exactly structured and what control he has over the foundation, but I think it's fair to say that he has a great deal of influence and power in that community.
Well, yes, he has
disproportionate amount, certainly.
I mean, disproportionate. Being the founder definitely helps, but if you want to have power and influence and receive respect in these types of structures, you have to earn it. So I think to a large degree, Linus Torvalds has earned it. And if he misbehaves, for some definition of misbehaving, he will not have the type of impact.
Okay, let's talk about that. Wait,
yeah.
so obviously there is a kind of a consensus mechanism with Ethereum. Even though there may be a foundation and there may be a king of Ethereum, he doesn't necessarily have unilateral control. We certainly acknowledge that. If he does something that the community doesn't agree with, then the community can decide to go in a different direction. What's interesting, though, is the mechanism by which that would happen is very ambiguous. You know what I mean? Like, how would an actual conflict between a small collection of powerful special interests in Ethereum versus a larger, wider array of people, how would that manifest in what direction would things go is largely unknown, you know? Whereas you compare it to, say, the governmental structure in Switzerland, where the elections are set a certain way, and you know what I mean? Like, if you compare consensus mechanisms across traditional centralized entities, the process by which consensus is determined is very, very clear. But in cases in the crypto industry, how consensus happens is very hazy. There's no constitution. There's no Bill of Rights. You know what I mean? This is where it just kind of seems odd, even though that gets thrown around a lot, that everybody can go in a different direction if they want. But in practice, how does that really happen in a way that seems fair?
Well, you're comparing apples and oranges. You're comparing a situation that is essentially a crisis, a messy situation where there's a lack of social consensus, and you have different factions trying to pull in different directions, to something that is codified because it's not a large crisis situation. And if there is a crisis situation, and it has been a very, very long time since we had one in Switzerland, but that's also very messy. It can go as far as being a civil war. So this is not comparison.
Well, let's talk.
The social. We go back to the.
Let's talk about a specific hypothetical in Ethereum. Okay, let's say that somebody proposes some change to the Ethereum code base, and it creates a schism, right? Where half the people want this feature and half the people don't. What do you think is going to affect where the majority of the people go? Wouldn't it be whoever controls the most influence in terms of tokens and pricing? Not necessarily the largest number of people. They're going to go wherever the value of Ethereum stays the most, because Ethereum is split between Ethereum Classic and the regular Ethereum. And now one is worth significantly less, and so less people are interested in going behind that blockchain, even though it might necessarily be a more efficient technological thing. Same thing with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, right? Bitcoin Cash is a much more efficient, more scalable version of Bitcoin. It's more flexible, it's more powerful, it can handle more transactions, but it's worth a fraction of what BTC is worth, which is a much slower, more cumbersome system. So we see lots of examples in the crypto world where what's in the best interest of the people and technology is not necessarily the direction in which things go.
And you are right in the sense that what decides contentious fork is the market, and a lot of it is in the hands of not a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting to claim that Bitcoin Cash is technically superior to Bitcoin. I mean, if you don't want to go into that, we don't have to. But I don't know.
Well, do you think it's not?
I don't want to address that.
Well, the argument for Bitcoin Cash is we're going to put more transactions into the system, without regards to the reason why the transactions are constrained in the first place, which is to avoid centralizing essentially the blockchain by making the requirements to run a full node higher. So there's a trade-off, and Bitcoin Cash took a different place in that trade-off.
But don't you think Bitcoin Cash moved in the same direction that Ethereum did when it moved to proof of stake? It did a similar movement.
We should
no way.
We should avoid
block
this
size on
topic.
Ethereum is the same as before the merge.
we're gonna get into like an hour-long discussion because there's certain things, Louis, that you said. I'm perfectly happy to talk to you about this outside the podcast, but I would contest the notion that full nodes decentralize the blockchain in any way. I think that's completely incorrect. It's propaganda. It is not correct.
Well, it's not completely true. You're absolutely right.
Fact,
there's the question of block producers as well.
And in fact, Nakamoto themselves predicted that in the end, everything would be run by specialized computers, run by specialized entities in large warehouses. So I don't even want to get into that topic. But in terms of Ethereum being decentralized, there's 2 points that I want to make. The first is that with the rollback for the DAO, with the DAO hack, that to me doesn't look decentralized. That's not a system to me that is decentralized because that's a unilateral decision that's being made. The second is in terms of what changes get adopted in Ethereum, I can make a prediction. There will never be a change that is adopted. There will never be an EIP that is approved, which does not either not affect the value of Ethereum or increase its value. So if there's a potential change that might make things better, whether it's technically, whether it's to use it as money, but it will negatively impact the valuation in fiat dollars of Ethereum, that change will never be adopted. And that's because the people that control Ethereum, all of the interests, all want the value to go up as much as possible. And again, to me, that doesn't seem like a decentralized system because it means that there's a central authority, whether it's acknowledged explicitly or not, which controls what gets done and how things work. And that doesn't seem decentralized.
Well, I would like to interject there because
I would like to interject as well.
Let me
Louis, let Louis go.
Well,
and then you
look, you are two, I am one. So
yeah.
Go ahead.
With regards to your second point, I think you're probably correct that the EIPs that would negatively affect the value of Ethereum would not be adopted. That's true. With regards to the first point, I would object that the DAO fork was not a rollback per se. And fundamentally, it's an interesting question because it breaks not the motto of code is low, but it means that the code of the execution engine that undoes the hack is now low, but it required a lot of social consensus. It was a crisis, like I mentioned, that led to this change. So the question is, when you're bootstrapping a decentralized system, is it going to matter 15 years down the line that this DAO incident happened? I don't know. It's an open question for me, but
to me, it just demonstrates. And so, Adam, I said I would let you go, so you should go.
Well, I would say actually, I'm not sure. There may be something that contradicts your claim that the foundation would never do anything that wouldn't potentially affect the price. I think you can look. I think their movement to proof of stake was a very risky move that could have affected the price of Ethereum significantly. Any kind of major change like that, I think, is risky. Although I think they tempered it with these parameters where they allowed people to stake Ethereum and then they forced their Ethereum to be held hostage. So that does play into your notion of they're not going to do anything to let the value tank by forcing people to not be able to sell or move their Ethereum. I don't know. I think there's so much obvious stuff we could talk about, topographically about the design of the network that we don't even need to get into what the motivations are of the bag holders. We certainly know everybody wants to make money in this industry. It's part of what makes it work.
Fair enough. All right, so we're getting to about an hour and a half. Should we wrap things up, Adam, Louis? What do you guys think? Is there something, Louis, you wanted to make a statement or say something before we sort of wrap things up? Or maybe a topic you'd want to discuss before we go? Like we want to.
You can tell us to have fun staying poor. You can tell us we don't understand.
No, I don't think it would be appropriate to say that. No, I guess if I have closing words, the closing words are pay with cash and don't forget to hydrate.
I just want to say, I like you. I think you're a cool guy. It's a shame we're not in the same spot. It would be fun to go out and have a beer with you. I forget that crypto people are people too. And even if we have philosophical disagreements about whether or not what we're doing is good or bad for society. We are people, and I want to apologize if I haven't shown enough respect, because I do respect, that you have your right to have an opinion.
Yeah, Lou, I
appreciate it.
really
And thank you for
appreciate
having me, by the way.
Oh, absolutely. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us and speaking to us about the industry and about our philosophical differences. Thank you.
Yeah, let's a few quick questions. Do you hold a lot of crypto?
No, most of my wealth is in fiat, quote unquote fiat.
Do you, and if you did hold crypto, would it be mostly just Ethereum? Is it what you need to just, do your work?
We don't really need that much Ethereum to do our work. It would be what I need to have fun with it, essentially. Like I don't plan on getting rich from a stash of crypto necessarily.
Well, what do you think about NFTs? Do you think they're legit?
I think they're misunderstood a lot. I think it's a very general concept, right? It's any token that is non-fungible. But I think even collectibles make sense on the blockchain. And I have a couple collectibles that I didn't pay thousands of dollars for because I'm not with, but I think they make sense in the way they're put together.
I gotcha. And you don't. What about ordinals on the Bitcoin blockchain?
It's an interesting idea. I guess technically it functions as a collectible. They don't want to say NFT, but I don't know if it's the best system. But it doesn't have to be the best system. It just has to have market fit. So maybe it has market fit.
So what's interesting is if blockchain is really that important, on the Bitcoin blockchain now, people are actually stuffing the actual content. And on Ethereum, I think it would be even more expensive to do that, right? To stuff the content. I don't know if it's as easy to stick a 4K worth of data on the Ethereum blockchain. So wouldn't you argue that if for the price, for the same amount of money in a transaction, if you could do it cheaper on Bitcoin's blockchain, that means it's better for storing NFTs than on Ethereum? Because if it's just a receipt to some off-chain thing, it's not really on blockchain, right?
I have NFTs that are stored on chain on Ethereum, and it depends. That's certainly a factor, but you can also ask: is it going to be long-term sustainable? You can ask whether Bitcoin is going to keep operating or whether Ethereum is going to keep operating. You can ask what the functionalities are around the NFTs on top of that. So it depends on more things than just price.
It's been really fun chatting with you, and we'll have to do it again. I guess this is what happens when there's no real agenda. It's just free form. It can go deep into the weeds. So I apologize for any of our listeners if they won't be around anymore for me to apologize if we bored them too much.
Louis needs to write a book, and then you can come back on and promote it, and then you'll have something to can do that.
All right. Well, and of course, we'll see you in the Discord. And if you do feel like you have something to say and you want to talk about some stuff, or maybe you've realized the industry is not what you thought and you'd like to, give us a confession, we'll take that too. And I will tell you, if I suddenly discover that crypto and Ethereum are really have an amazing use case, I will be sure to tell everybody.
Yeah. No, I appreciate
that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. All right. There you have it. Another episode in the can. This time it was a spontaneous conversation with Ethereum developer Louis from Switzerland. And I took some notes after listening back. Our crypto buzzwords for this episode are less trust assumptions and less technical points of failure. So those were some of the issues that we covered. Do you agree with Louis that these crypto systems have less trust assumptions and less technical points of failure? Let us know, leave comments, go visit our Discord, visit ioradio.org and you'll see links to our Discord and all of that. We're also now up, our podcasts are up at iTunes, Amazon, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Podchaser, and several other platforms. So if you search for IO-radio, they should come up. And see you guys next episode.